Okay, so let's take a look at opening a file. And in this video, we're going to look at lots of different ways to work with opening a file. Whether it's a read-only file, whether you're writing something, appending, reading a file that's already there, creating your own file, those kinds of things. So this is the way it works. Essentially, we're going to use the open function. So that's how we're going to actually open the file. And this will let us create a file object, and then it associates it with a file on the disk. And we're going to use a variable that will reference that file object or file, and that's the way that we're going to be getting to the data on the disk itself. Okay, so this is the actual format. So here we have, with the file object piece here, and we're going to use a variable name like customer file to reference that. And then we're going to use open. And then with this open function, we're going to use the file name and then a comma and then the mode that we want to use to open that file. So here's the way this works. As an example here, so we have open with this, then you notice the file name is actually going to be a string. Okay, so here we go with customers.txt, and notice those are in quotes, single or double. Remember, when Python doesn't matter. And so we've got .txt in here. Do not forget that, okay? And don't be surprised if you do, and I'll show you a common error later in the video. If we're in the labs, I would say remind me, but hopefully I'll remember on this video. So anyway, so we have customers.txt in quotes, then here's our comma, and then you see in here quote r quote, okay? So that is over here. Notice under the mode section, we have reading only. So we can't write to it. And I just snipped this right from the digital copy of the book. So you can see this little table. It's great. So we have R for reading only, W for writing, and A for appending. So R, it will only read. So the file will not be changed. That other file cannot be changed, whatever you're opening. You can't write to it. You can't erase things. You can't do anything to it. Okay, so read only. W, the way this one works, and you have to be very, very careful with it because it will open a file for writing. But essentially what it is doing is if a file is already there, it erases what is in that file and copies in whatever you are, creating in that particular program. So you have to be really careful with that. With A, it will open a file, and if it's all set up or whatever, let's say you already have data in a customer's file, it will take that file and it will append it, meaning it's going to put it at the end of the document. So if we already have 10 names in there for our customers and we had 3 more that we wanted to add, it will just simply add them to the bottom. Nice little benefit of using A is that if the file doesn't exist, it actually will create it for you. Okay, so as you're using these modes, be very, very careful with W because, granted, we're in this class and in the programs that we're going to do, it's not like, life or death or, going to cost us 100 hours of recreating something. But in the real world, if you're using W and you had a customer's file and it had all sorts of data, of course, you would have it backed up and all that kind of good stuff, but you don't want to write over a file and accidentally delete thousands of lines of customers' data or anything like that. So you have to be really careful with W, all right? And we'll play with it a little bit as we go. So let's take a look at this particular file, all right? So, actually, I want to skip ahead to this just real quick and then we'll come back. So in this case, we're using REPL.it. So our files will be in there, and we looked at it briefly in the last video, and I'll show you in a second again. But if you were using this outside of REPL and you wanted to specify the location of a file, that's on the next slide. So the way that you can do that is you do the same type of thing. So file, here's our variable name again, our variable reference for the file object, and we are saying open. We have to put an R in here, and then notice the quote starts with the full path. So it's on the C drive, users Joe, and then here's the file itself. So test.txt, and then this has a W. Remember, W erases the content of the existing file. Be careful with that. But since we're using REPL.com, we are not going to really mess with this. Okay, so this is just, if you want to refer to this, or if you're working on a project outside of what we're doing here, this is the way that you would do it. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back to here real quick, and I want to open this. So as I jump into here, here we go. So this is the file, and you can see in here, I mean, we just have a main function, not really a big deal here. I'm calling it here. And then take a look at the way this is set up. So on line 3, we have, in fact, let me make this just a hair bigger. Let's see. Let me drop this out here a little bit. There we go. Okay, so give us a little bit bigger text font to work with, and text to work with here. So here we go. So we have my file. That's our variable name. It could be, relatively anything that you want to put in here. So we have my file, and you can see here the equal sign. Here's the open function. Here's the name of the file that's being used, and you can see here names.txt. So here are some names in here, and I'm gonna go back to main, and then comma, and I just have an R here for read. Okay, so this is one way that you can read the names through, and this is a loop, and this is actually in the next section 6.2. We'll talk about how to set this up, but just really quickly, quick preview for this. We're just using a simple loop, so we're using a line as my variable that I can use here to roll through each line. That's why I did that, right? So as we go through the file, and then it's using it in my file, which is this, referencing this file, and it will roll through and just print those down. So we'll take a look at the loop later on and how it works and everything else. But for now, we are looking at this piece right here. You have some type of variable that you're going to refer to that you have to use later on in your program. For example, right here, and you're opening it, putting the little, whatever the file name is in this particular piece here for text, and then reading it through that way. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at how you're going to write data to a file. And so when we're talking about the, however we're going to get this particular uh, data back to the file, how you're going to write it in there, what you're going to do, we're going to use a method. And so a method, you can just see here, just real simple definition of it. So a method is a function that belongs to an object, and it performs some operation using that object. So we've done this before, and you'll kind of see in a second. But once you've opened a file, you're going to use the file objects methods to perform operations on the file. So we've done this with different things like, for example, using turtle and some of the things that we've built in there before. So you've kind of done this. So anyway, so as we take a look at this, we're going to use the write method. And with the write method, we'll have whatever file variable that we use to reference the file object, whatever our variable name might be here, whether it's my file or whatever we want to use, and then a dot, and then write. And then we have some type of string or whatever we're going to store in here. And very important that you use \n to separate your items. So I'll show you an example of that here in just a second. And then at the very end of the file, you'll see this particular method used each time, file.close, and then we just use the open and close parenthesis. We don't put anything in there. So you want to be able to close out your file, make sure that it closes properly so you don't lose any data along the way. So let's take a look at this program. We'll talk about the write method. Okay, so as I go over here, and I'll open this baby up in here, you can see that if you just look over here, we have a philosopher's text file. We have the main Python program, just a real simple main function here. And then here we go. So we're using out file as our name here that we're referencing the file itself. And then here's the open function, so philosophers.txt, comma, and then you notice this is a W, so this is going to write. So this is going to take anything that's in here, happens to be these three names, and erase it and replace it with whatever we would like. Okay, so, and we'll take a look at that here in a second too. So as we write three philosophers' names to this particular file, here's where we use the write method. So outfile.write, and we're just going to put a few names in here. So you can see we open this up, and in quotes we're saying John Locke. Notice the \n. What that will do is it lets, in fact you can see it here as it's already run and stored. It goes down to the next line. So these are stored as strings. We have this particular one, this particular one, this particular one. If we don't include \n, then we have no way of knowing, the computer doesn't have any way of knowing where the next string will begin. Okay, so we'll write it in there and it'd be great, but when we read it back out, we'd have problems trying to, determine where those particular, new lines would start, new strings would start. Okay, so if I run this, super exciting. That's basically it, right? In fact, let me go ahead and I'll just do this. I'll say delete. So we don't have any kind of output that we're going to see over here in the console window. So when I hit run, all it does is see now it created this particular file, and there it is. So if I wanted to change this up or add another one in here, I could. Or let's just change this one. I don't know. We'll just say Jeff right here, right? So here we go with John. But if I go back up here and I say Jeff and I run this again using W, it replaces it. Now it says Jeff Locke, which is pretty dumb, but I guess. But anyway, that's that, I guess. So anyway, so that's one way of doing it and setting it up, getting the using the right method, going through putting it that way. Notice down here, closing the file out using the name that you reference here, dot close, and we show our parentheses there. Let me show you very quickly if you do not put the backslash n, just because. Okay, and you can see in here the way this is, but we're going to write over the top of it using W. I'm going to click run. Does nothing over here, right? But over here, look at this. It's a mess. Okay, so trying to go through now, we wrote it, it's fine, it executed, the computer doesn't care. But if we tried to read this back out, we would have no idea where the gaps were. And in fact, we'd probably try and use a space that was in here if you're just randomly looking at it. But anyway, so don't forget about using \n for our new line operator. Remember, in the quotes. And in a minute, we'll look, in a little while, we'll look at how to integrate this if we have variable names as well. So I'm going to run this again and then get my files back the way they're supposed to be. Okay, so, or this particular text file. Okay, so that's how we're going to use the right method. All right, let's go ahead and read data in. So if I come over to this particular slide, we're going to use the read method. So we have to open the file, otherwise, we have troubles. And then we're going to return everything as a string. So that's going to become a problem for us later on. We'll have to convert if we need to use ints or floats or something. Okay, so let's take a look at this particular one. Now click over here. Here we go. So we have our little philosopher's file. It's already been created. And here we go with open. We're using in file this time as our name. We're using R to just read it. And it will simply come through here. And it's going to use this particular piece here. See, read coming in. It's going to read everything in. And we're using file underscore contents here just to reference our in file read. Notice how this has this little piece here says close, and then closing the file after, and then we're just going to print this. Okay, that references it. Okay, and you can put this close file down below the print. It really doesn't matter for this, but anyway, and there we go. So there's our print. So John Locke, David, whatever, and Ed. So there we go. John, Dave, Ed. Good. All right, so that's how you're going to use read in. You reference this. This will do everything at one time. Okay, so that's using read. Okay, dot read. But if we want to do it line by line, we'll use the readline method. So let's take a look at that. So the readline method that we're using here, we're doing it independently as a line, which is usually what you're going to do. Okay, so you'll use readline more than read for sure. So read does the whole program, reads the whole file in, and basically you're just printing it, and that's kind of it. You're going to use readline a lot more. In fact, we'll use it with loops and everything else. So the line is returned as a string, and it includes the \n in it. So makes it a little bit weird. You'll see in a second. And then in our read position, just the next place that it's going to go down and read from, the next item that it's going to read after that. So let's take a look at 6-3. There's a lot of code in this. I know this is kind of a longer video and there's a lot of code, but I wanted to give you a lot of different examples. I stole most of this from the book. I pulled all the programs in here that I could get from there, and then I added some things in, and I wanted you to be able to see a lot of different things. Okay, so here we go. We've got our philosophers.txt file again, and here we go. We're opening it using R only, so we're just opening it up. Now this time we're using readline, and we're setting a variable to each one of those lines. So we know that there are 3 lines in here. We're going to get to loops later on, but for now we're just doing this line 1, line 2, line 3, and it's reading them in, and then again close, and then you'll see down here we're printing each one of those. So what we're doing is we're saying line 1, this is the variable that we're going to use to store the information on this line. Then it goes down to the next line, reads this in, does this. So these 3 lines will print essentially the same way. So if I click run, here we go with this piece here. All right. So we've got all 3 of them again. Okay. So now that we're done with that, let's talk about what we might do down here with concatenating a new line is stripping it from a string. Okay, so when we're putting this together, we're writing, data items to a file. We're using the \n to separate our items out. You saw that a second ago, or a couple minutes ago, right? So we're using that, but if we want to use the right operator, we're using a variable perhaps. We want to go into this. Let's take a look at this one, and you'll see how this works. Okay, so now we're taking input from the user. We do not have a data file in here. We're taking input from the user and we're saying, okay, go ahead, enter the name of your 3 friends, storing them just like we've done, right, from the whole semester. So we've input this really simple string input, asking for these things. All right, so we've got that. Then we're coming down and we're saying, now go ahead and open this using open function, using W to create a friends.txt file. And our variable reference we're going to use is my file. Okay, so there we go there. As we step down, now we're going to use the write method for my file. There we go. I know a little tricky to follow, but for my file, we're going to use the write method, and we're going to say, hey, I want to store name 1, name 2, and name 3. The reason why these are here, we do use plus and then the quote \n. The reason why those are there is because we need to have that line return go down, the character return down, new line, so that we know where, if we're reading it back in, that we know where the breaks are and where the new name starts. Okay, and then it closes it, and that's basically it. It's going to print this little thing out. Okay, so let's take a look at this. When I click run and ask for my friend names, I don't know, I'm going to say Joe. And then I'm going to say, I don't know, Susie. I don't know, Sally. So those are my 3 friends. So notice this little output here. So we have the names are written to friends.txt. And if you notice over here, now we have that file sitting here. So when I click this, boom, here are my 3 names that I just typed in, and the \n dropped them down to the next line. Okay. Otherwise, we would end up with this, and the computer would not know when we went to read them back in where it should do the splits. Okay. Now, as you learn more about Python, I mean, you'd figure out ways to do that, but for what we're doing this semester, we will not be able to do it. Okay, so anyway, so there's that. Let's go back to main. And, oh, just to roll this down, I just called this down here, so I know part of the program's off the screen. Okay, so that is if we were going to go ahead and we need to add that \n, right? So we're using the plus operator here. Now, what happens if you have to remove that return? Okay, and that gives you a new little thing to check out. So let's take a look at this program. So 6-5. Here we go. This time we already have this philosopher's file again. Getting tired of seeing those names, I'm sure, but anyway, that's it. This particular one, again, is just a call down here, so that's it. I'll try and leave this as much on the screen as possible. There we go. And so we have in our main function, we're using infile. We're opening philosophers with just an R. We have line 1. Again, we're storing this in here using readline. And then we're just kind of doing each one of those. Notice this little R strip. So we have our strip piece here. So we're going to go ahead and take away the \n. So this is a common way of doing it. Again, we're going to use loops in the next section, so we won't be typing all this out every time. And then we close the file, and then we're printing this out. So this is helping you determine where it's looking for the end, and it's going to go ahead and take away the new line, and then it just stores it here. Okay, so if I click run, boom, there are my names, and we do not have that \n in there. All right, so that's basically it with that one. Okay, so the reason why we're using rstrip is because we don't want it to look like this. Okay, so where you have that new line printed in there as well. Remember, print has its own, the print function has its own new line that comes at the end of it. And we have the one that's stored in here for each one of these. So you would end up with this. So you'd end up with, after John Locke, you have boom, boom. So you have 2 of those. Okay, so that's what you would get if we did not have this rstrip in here. Okay, so with the rstrip, we get this. And without, like, if I was just to comment this out just real quick with this. We end up with that in there. So that's why you're using the rstrip in that one. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at appending. So here we are with appending data, and just as a quick reminder, when you use W, you're going to write over the top of whatever you already have there, right? So if we want to use append, we're going to take the file that's there, and we're going to write the data at the end of the file. So if it doesn't exist, it will just go ahead and create it for us, which is kind of nice. So to take a look at that one, you'll see this little example code here. So we're assuming that philosophers.txt already exists and already has data in it. So we're going to add some data. So we're going to open it, this particular file. We're going to use A to add, and then we're going to use just a real simple write method to write a couple things in there. Notice the backslash ends, and then close that out. So to take a look at this, I commented it out first just so you can see it. So so we'll get rid of it. We're just ignoring this right now, right? And then this is what the file is going to do. It's going to open this using read. It's going to use file contents here with the read method. Going to close it out and then go ahead and print it out. So here we go. Boom, John David Edmund. Okay, so there's that. Now, let's say, go ahead and delete this. Boom, boom. Now when I click run, it's going to open the file. It's going to append it by adding these two pieces in, then close it. Then it's going to go ahead and read through it and then print it out. So I'm going to go ahead and run, and boom, there we go. So it's all in there. And if I click over here, you can verify that yes, those are in fact in there. Okay, so and if I wanted to do another append, I could do that too, right? So if I click run again, look at that, it added those same two lines at the end, Trey Parker, Joe Green, at the end again. So we'll keep adding them on there until you stop running it or whatever. Okay, so that's a real simple append. Okay, I know this has been a really long video. We have one more thing to go over. Okay, so this is the last slide that we're doing on this one. Like I said, sorry, I know it's been a long one, long video, but we have just a couple more things to do here. This is the last slide, though. We'll look at two programs, and I'll show you how this works. This is very, very important for getting your data stored correctly and reading it back in. So here we have, obviously, we're not going to use strings for everything, but we're storing things as strings to get these files to work. But then we have to convert it back to a number, whether it be like an int or a float, something like that, right? So we're going to use the str function, so converts our value to a string. And then when they're read back in, they're read in as strings, and you want to convert them to either an int or a float or whatever. So we have a couple examples here. Actually, I have a third one that I'm going to throw in here too, I think. But let's take a look at this. Okay, so this very first one, we've got our little number program here. So we're opening numbers.txt. You'll see these numbers. They're going to be replaced in a second because we're using W. So here we are, just like we would normally ask for a float input from a user. Okay, so we're assigning these variable names. We've got floats in here for an input. Really simple stuff, right? We've done this for a long time now. So we're going to ask for these numbers from the user. Again, we're going to use loops next chapter, next section, so we'll simplify this a little bit. But anyway, so we're asking for those, and then we're going to come down here, and you'll see writing them to the file. Now, notice this. We're taking them as a float. Okay, so they're stored. Num1 will store them as a float in here, right? So if we come down here, you notice now we're using the write method, but we're having to use str. So we're using this little str to convert these values to a string. And then we're using plus with this little, quotes, backslash n, quote, to add the new line operator so it's stored correctly with, where it goes to the next line so we know where those divisions are in those particular entries and with those variables. So that's the way this works. This is kind of complicated, but once you do it a couple times, you'll go, oh, okay. That's one of the reasons why I put so much code in here and why I've spent so much time kind of making this video. I know I'm try and keep it a little shorter, but I really wanted you guys to see all this stuff in here. So, so now when I run this, I'm going to say run, and I can enter, float, and I can enter this, whatever it might be, and data is written to that. So when I come over here, here are these pieces in here. Now these are all stored as they're in here as strings. Okay, so they were numbers. They look like numbers, right? They look like a float. But these are strings. So when we pull them back out, we have to convert them back to a float. So that's where this next one comes from. Okay, so let's take a look at 6-7, and we'll see converting it back to a float. And so if I go over to that particular link, here we are, and we're reading in a numbers file, and it has these little numbers in here, right? So it could be anything, doesn't matter, but we're reading them in. And there we go. And so we have in our main function, we have in file again. We're opening this up, opening that particular text file up. And then notice on this, as we're reading this back in and assigning them to a variable, we're forcing a float out of it. Okay, so we're saying float with our readline statement here. So we've got to put that in there using readline method within file here, and we're forcing it to be a float. And then that way, and then we're closing the file because now we're back in RAM, so we're fine. And then we're going to do a total and then print those out. So if I run this file, we say right here, we see the numbers are 22, all this little stuff here, however they are there, and then their total is, and it gives us the total. It just adds them up. Now, if you go back and you forget to put this in, and you forget to put the float in there to force it, then it's a string. It messes it up. We can't do a total. It's got the little, you see here we don't, total is just nothing. There's nothing in there. Notice how it completely skipped it. So that's kind of what they were, but the total is nothing. It's confused basically, right? So make sure you're forcing these in here, and you can use int or float. It really doesn't matter. However you would like to do it. For something like this, I would probably use float just because it gives us more flexibility, but that's totally up to you. Now, the last little piece in here, the last little link in here, I just put a part 2. All I really did was go in. If you wanted to see it, I put the two together, and I just copy and pasted them together. Terrible way of doing it, just throwing it all in main like this. But it's just doing the same thing. So it's asking for the numbers, storing them as a float. Then it comes down here. This is from that first 6-6 link. Then it has to store them as a string in the file when it's writing them. Closes the file, opens the file back up, converts them back to floats as it uses readline, closes the file down, then does the calculations with them. Okay, all of that to get the numbers in here. So let's see, we don't have any numbers in here. So let's run this. And so we're going to get these little numbers. I don't know. Let's keep it simple. I don't know. 8. Okay, and there are numbers listed out and the total there. So it's just combining the two programs, and I thought you might want to see a link of that. So, anyway, so there's a lot in this, and again, next section we go over the ability to use loops in them. It makes it much easier to do because you only write this once, but you do have to do the loops. So, but anyway, so there's that, and I'm going to apologize right now because this was such a long video, but there is a ton in this section. I broke out that other video for the first chunk already, but this one was a long one, so you may have to go back and look at some other things along the way as you're trying to do these. Don't forget to use the example code that we have, so that with the links, so you can check them out, see those as you're playing around and trying to do this on your own.